After 10 years as a motorcycle journalist, I'm often asked, what bike would you buy? And the answer is that if money were no object, there would be about 6 bikes I'd have in my Jay Leno Garage. Of course, the reality is slightly different. My first ride on a KLR 650 was in New Zealand back in 2009. It was a Kiwi Rider Magazine test bike, and much to my hardcore adventure riding buddies' chagrin, I really liked the bike. It just suited the way I ride, particularly on the dirt, and I really enjoyed wringing its neck on the tarmac too. I said at the time I'm not one of those skilful, back it in, roosted out of the corners type dirt riders. I prefer to potter around and explore when adventuring, to take it all in and look for the photo opportunities, rather than just rark it up. And the venerable KLR I found quite ideal for doing just that. I found it quite comfortable touring to and from the adventure, and similarly good and economical for around town and commuting duties. So, when circumstances moved me back to my native Australia last year, I was faced with a decision about what bike to buy. I still work as a correspondent for Kiwi Rider and have added a couple of Aussie magazines to my repertoire, so I still have reasonably regular test bikes, but I needed something to fill in the in-between times. A KLR wasn't actually on my radar as I was doing the rounds of the bike shops, looking at some second-hand units and a few new ones, when out at Team Moto Maruka at Brisbane, a shiny blue KLR stood just near the doorway, right at the back of the shop. Ka-ching! Of course! All of a sudden I was back in the black blocks of the Waikato, and feeling at one with the machine. Perfecto. 90 seconds later, I'd put down a deposit on a run-out 2011 model for 7,500 Australian dollars right away and a 2-year warranty. 8 months later, I'm still very happy with the decision. From the recently released Australian sales figures, where the KLR once again was the best-selling vehicle in the adventure touring sector, it appears I'm not the only one. I haven't racked up huge mileage on it yet, having had a number of test bikes recently, but I have had some very good rides, and I always enjoy throwing a leg over its lofty saddle. That's another attraction. I'm tall, and so is the KLR. The saddle height is a man-sized 890mm, and the rest of the ergos fit my frame equally comfortably. The 1480mm wheelbase isn't overly long, but the bike proves quite stable, yet agile on the open road and in the tight stuff. It is very easy to get the foot pegs on the ground when sports tarmac riding, partly because the bike is sure-footed enough and well enough balanced to really chuck it in. At 194 kilograms, it's no lightweight trail bike, yet, as mentioned, the balance of the bike is very good and the centre of mass appears to be quite low. Manhandling it along a single track is manageable, particularly if you're Big Dave size. The 651cc double overhead cam 4-valve liquid-cooled single is remarkably compliant, without the harshness of some of the other big-bore single bangers, possibly due to its dual counterbalances. It's also one of the few remaining new bikes with a carburetor, but the CVK40 unit does a pretty good job of feeding the 100 by 83mm bore and stroke, and it's sparked by a modern CDI. Lubrication is by a wet sump, and it runs a wet multi-plate clutch that has a good feel and is one finger light. Originally, the bike was supplied as restricted, with holes drilled in the carburetor sliders, so it qualifies under the local learner-approved motorcycle scheme. But as soon as it was run in, I had them filled and de-restricted to unleash its full almost 40 horses. The 5-speed gearbox is reliable, but it does need a definite kick from first to second. But, like the power output, for what I use it for, 5 speeds is all it needs. The semi-double cradle, high-tensile steel frame is suspended by 41mm telescopic forks up front and a bottom-link Unitrack with 5-way adjustable preload and stepless rebound adjustment shock absorber at the rear. It all works just fine right out of the box. The twin-piston front brakes with 280mm disc up front are good for road and street use, and the single-disc 240 rear likewise. They aren't street bike savage brakes, but on the dirt that's a good thing. And that's generally how I find the bike, a good compromise right across the board. It has a big cargo rack, although no under-seat carrying capacity, and it's a generally good utility vehicle. Kawasaki started producing the KLR 650 in 1987, and it remained almost unchanged until 2007. Some earlier models had a history of known issues, see doohickey, rear subframe bolt, and some were prone to high oil consumption. But by 2011, these issues all seem to have been addressed, and I'm quite confident to fill the large 22-litre tank and head for the hills, and I enjoy it every time I do. Like this ride, I'd had enough of the office by 2 p.m, and I headed out to the M1 freeway and pointed the bike north. "45 minutes of super slab later, I took the Caboolture exit and made my way out to Woodford. From there, I turned into the Glasshouse Mountains district and made my way over the dirt roads to the mountains lookout. From there, I doubled back to the Mount Me, funny name that one, turn-off, and took the reasonably good sports bike roads back to Brisbane. It was well past dark by the time I got back to base, but, as usual, the KLR took everything I dished up to it, freeway, road, trail and track, all in its stride, and that's why I like my KLR.